presentation entitled, what is it called? Uh, Something to do with corruption. Negative capability. Negative capability, that's the name. Now, last week in Naked to Mine Enemies, we were discussing the presidential campaign of 1996, and this week I thought we'd do a little post-mortem, or a little more post-mortem as the case may be, since it seems that we have been endlessly involved in doing a post-mortem. But before I get into it, I suppose I should sift through all of my valuable money-saving triple coupons, since I will be going to the market. And as a special treat for you music lovers, approximately the last half hour of this performance will consist, in fact, of a performance by Onye Maki, live at the Middle East, which I was lucky enough to get his permission to broadcast. And Onye, if you need to get a hold of me, my number is 401-751-6715. And let that be an example to you. So, anyway, yeah, there's a one chance in a million that Onye Maki is listening to this now. Who knows, maybe he's off in Lagos or something, or leading the rebel troops in Zaire. I mean, could be, for all I know. Well, let's see. We got a save 50 cents on one jar of Ortega salsa or Ortega shells. Now, I could use this little coupon and use it to buy the beans instead. See, that's what I call being crafty. Actually, that's what some people call being unscrupulous. But after all, the presentation is called Negative Capability. Here's another one. Save 50 cents on salsa or shells, which I will use for the beans. The beans are only $1.15. So actually, I'm going to get them for a negative amount of money. I mean, they'll pay me 35 cents to take the beans away. No, actually, they won't. They'll only give them to me for free. But free's pretty good. And I'm not going to need any of the Ortega salsa. We've got plenty of salsa. But you don't know beans about Ortega unless you've had their beans. Yes, sir. Kind of bland, but if you throw some cheese in there, now you're cooking with gas. Whatever the hell that means. Let's see, soft drinks. This is the real killer. She wants orange juice, my girlfriend. She wants orange juice. There's no coupons for orange juice. Tang, that Tang is to orange juice as Bill Clinton is to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, if you get my drift. Now, I thought we had one for orange juice, but it seems to have mysteriously vanished. Well, I'll tell you something. I was going to get one of those kids' cuisine meals. They've really jacked the price up on those. They're like $1.87 each. And what's in them is no different from your 99-cent on-sale banquet frozen dinners, which, used to be really bad, and they still are because they have a lot of salt. But if you pick and choose very carefully, some of the more exotic combinations, like the Oriental one, with the 2 La Choy egg rolls aren't bad. That's what I should be digging for. I have one with meatloaf in it, which I'm not sure I'm going to ever touch until I'm absolutely desperate, like today. On a wonderful day like today. So, negative capability. What does it mean exactly? Well, it's much like me going into the store with no money and getting all these fancy little frozen meals for free because I have the triple coupons and the items are frequently so inexpensive to begin with. Like this Kraft macaroni and cheese dinner, which I couldn't seem to find in the freezer case yesterday. It says save 40 cents. If you triple that, well, then what you're talking, buddy, is say it's $1.19. You get it for free. I mean, who can beat that? You beat it with a stick. I wouldn't even buy some of this stuff, if it weren't for the fact that I get it for nothing. Nothing, do you hear? And, theoretically, you're supposed to spend $5. But there are many ways of getting around that. And when it comes right down to it, they're just not going to say anything if you don't spend $5. And that's the way it is. So, let's say I got this buy one, get one free Ortega refried beans. Gee, I don't know. That's not worth it. See, I'm frantically trying to find something for orange juice here. I hate to pay retail for anything, and I thought for sure I had $1 off. You know what happened? I probably threw it away because it expired. That's one thing I'm punctilious about, is not attempting to palm off the expired coupons. They just won't go through, and unless they're in a big hurry, you can't run a slash through the barcode and have them do it manually. Because, you know, then they'll say, oh, we can't take coupons without the expiration date. What's this? Free milk when you buy any 2 Oreo, Honey Maid, Nutter Butter cookies. I bet you I could buy any Nabisco cookie and get this little deal. So now the question is, see if I have coupons for Oreo, Nutter Butter, or any Nabisco cookie, and see if I can't get the milk for practically nothing. That would be under snacks. You know, I don't generally, I have a feeling I'm going to have to take a pass on this, because I don't generally cut out the cookie coupons. I mean, we're trying to lose weight, but that reminds me, we have delicious Pepperidge Farm cookies. Now, would that be under snacks or desserts? Well, there's Nabisco's Snack Wells candy. I wonder if I could get away with that. And also, they have this thing here, free Reese's Crunchy Cookie Cup 1.44 ounce bar. But they don't sell them in the 1.44 ounce bars. You gotta buy the miserable 6-pack of Crunchy Cookie Cups. And I don't care what Rosie says on the Rosie O'Donnell show, they're just not that great, okay? And I don't care what she says. See, wouldn't you know what, I have the Keebler coupon. 60 cents off any 2 Keeblers, but this is Nabisco's crap. And I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. So, I could try the sneaky trick with the Snack Wells and see if that works. Could. Might. Oh, and I have a delicious Pepperidge Farm cookie. And I want it. I covet it. But would it be rude? Would it be rude for me to eat it now when I'm supposed to be, like, doing this? Well, it's kind of rude for me to be sifting through these damn coupons when I'm supposed to actually be doing a show here. Maybe I'll try this sneaky trick with the Snack Wells and see if that works. If I can even find these damn Snack Well candies. You know, they say they're going to be there. They're not there. Damn it. That really gets my goat. I don't even have any lunch for this weekend. I suppose I should buy some sort of lunch meat or something. I hate buying lunch meat. It's expensive. You have to wait like for hours in line at the deli, and but usually you can get a pretty good deal because they have these things like buy 1 pound of Conn's pressed ham, say 50 cents. But what you do is you figure out how much the ham is. Say it's $6 a pound, then you calibrate. Well, if I buy a 1/4 pound, will they notice? No. So you buy a 1/4 pound for $1.50, say 50 cents. You triple that as $1.50, so you get the ham for free. A 1/4 pound of ham for free. Can't beat it with a stick. So, well, all I got is save 60 cents on 2 Louis Rich's cold cuts. Now that's not such a big bargain here. No, it isn't, sir. I gotta like really start looking for good meat coupons here. 50 cents on 1 package of Hormel fully cooked bacon. Great, people are too bone lazy to cook their own bacon. Now you can buy it pre-cooked. Yeah, arteriosclerosis city, all aboard for a heart attack. Cholesterol junction, straight ahead. Woo, woo! Anyway, I'm glad that you enjoy the brazen humor of the Wrong Hero. And I'm even more glad that the dog enjoys it. Oh, and here's a corn nut. Have you ever eaten corn nuts? They look like little teeth. And, in fact, they're very crunchy. In fact, they're hard enough to replace one of your teeth with in a pinch. And they taste like corn. You know that corn syrup is in virtually half of everything you eat in one form or another? Corn starch, corn, corn syrup, corn is everywhere. And I guess it was the Indians' greatest gifts to the white man was corn. And speaking of corn, got some more poop here on the campaign of Bob Dole for the presidency of the United States. Yes, Bob had what you might call a negative capability. He had no swing vote going for him except the swing vote of previously decided, totally, thoroughly disgruntled Clinton haters, which were going to vote for a sock puppet before they would vote for William Blythe Jefferson Clinton. Ah, you know, Gerald Ford and Bill Clinton have something in common. See if you can guess. They are the only two presidents who were not called Gerald Ford and William Clinton at birth. Gerald Ford was adopted, and William Jefferson Clinton had a stepfather, and his real name, in fact, at birth was William Blythe, or William Jefferson Blythe the Third. You see, so that's kind of a real mind blower. And you know the thing yesterday, last week I was telling you about how Bob Dole and Bill Clinton share a common ancestry, that of King Henry the Third. I'm sure, well, and Bill's was illegitimate. He was a bar sinister, so to speak. Well, that's probably because his name was originally William Jefferson Blythe, and it was the Blythe clan who was related to King Henry III. It's kind of funny how our American presidents all turn up to be related to British royalty in some extremely, complicated and torturous way. Makes you kind of wonder, doesn't it? I suppose even Jimmy Carter had some, I don't know, I think he was related to Queen Elizabeth or something. That would be a fascinating topic for a book. Americans' fascination with both the presidency and the royal family. Like presidents and royalty. The Anglo-American links between the nation's rulers. You know, I'm going to be onto something here. I think I'm going to jot this down before I even get started. Presidents and royalty. Because, I for one, would at least look at a book that told you the links between, say, George Washington and King George, if any. Of course, King George was around the same time that Washington was, so I doubt they were directly related. Anyway, here's what happens when you decide to run for president or vice president, especially vice president. They take you into a little room and they say, we're going to ask you some hard questions. It is essential that you be utterly truthful with us, because if you don't tell us the truth, it's going to come out anyway, and we won't be very happy if we find this out from the press instead of from you. So, tell us something. Do you have any shady business investments? Well, except for the time that I bought stock in that gold mine, it turned out to be salted with bauxite. No shady business investments. I was the dupe of several failed business investments, you might say. Fine. So you weren't speculating on the market and getting insider information, and you were never a slumlord, and you didn't participate in any sweetheart deals. And it's like, hey, I was a politician. Of course I did all those things, but no, of course, I never left a paper trail. Okay, fine, fine. If you didn't, if nobody can prove you did it, then it's like you didn't do it. Okay, fine. No, we don't care. How about drug use? Will you admit to the use of any illegal drugs? You know, anybody in between the ages of 35 and 55, what are they going to say? It's like, I was in a cave from 1963 until 1982, so actually, no. Never did any drugs. I mean, you never even so much as toked on a joint? It's like, what's that? No, but I was living in a cave with some bears and we sucked on some, you know, the joints of some tourists that dropped by after we ate them. Well, okay, no drug use. Of course, no one's going to say that. They're going to say, well, yeah, I smoked pot a few times. How many times exactly? A few. How many is that? Oh, about 20,000, give or take. Let's see, I smoked pot every day, 5 times a day, for 3 years. So you do the addition, Einstein. That's 5,000 times. So 5,000 little hits to the brain. Well, you know, pot, I mean, we don't have to go into the specifics of your marijuana use. Nowadays, it will suffice to say that, let's see, we can make up some sort of story. Briefly, in the late 1970s, when his home state had experimented with decriminalizing marijuana, he tried it once or twice to see what people were talking about and to see if the drug truly were as dangerous as everybody was denying it was. And it was a foolish, youthful mistake, even though he was 33 at the time, and he vowed to never do it again. And how about other drugs? What do you mean other drugs? You mean like coffee? Sure, I drink coffee. No, we mean illegal drugs. Oh, you mean like heroin and cocaine? Well, let's see. My dentist gave me cocaine. Cocaine? He gave you cocaine? You sure he didn't give you procaine? Oh, no, he gave me cocaine. He was my dentist. He wasn't doing any dental work. He's just my friend. We used to sit around and snort coke. Got any? Okay, we can make it something out of this. If he's the only guy you ever snorted coke with, you could say, other than for medicinal purposes, never used drugs and except for marijuana and blah 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 blah. Well, what about heroin? Well, I didn't use heroin, but I used methadone. Well, what exactly is that supposed to mean? Well, see, I was a hardcore morphine addict, and in order to wean me off the stuff, they made me swallow methadone dissolved in orange juice for 3 years, until I finally shook the habit with a little train trip down to Lexington, Kentucky, where I met members of the best jazz band in the world. Former junkies, all jazz men, all great, all the time. And I blew them cats' mind, because like, back in them days, they'd never heard nothing about no Indian music, and I could like sort of make a noise like Ravi Shankar on the guitar, so I was up there going wang, 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 and these cats were grooving on it the most, like, wow, dig the reverberation. Let me see if I can do that. Wang. Okay, well, let's not get into any more of your drug use here. What about your military record? Well, what about it? Well, what about your military record? Well, what about it? Well, were you ever in the military? Well, I kind of dropped out of ROTC. You mean you were AWOL from ROTC? Well, I wouldn't exactly put it that way. I try to be a little more tactful if I were to honestly discuss this. No, I don't really want to go on record as saying that I quit ROTC. Let's just say I served a year in the military, and we'll leave it at that. I don't think they're going to probe anymore. No, I never had the honor of serving in America's Armed Forces. I was in ROTC, but that's as far as it went. Fortunately, there was no war back when I was eligible to go to war, except Grenada, and I don't think even the most diehard advocate of military service for politicians is going to insist that I had served in Grenada. See, I was very lucky. I was too old for, let's see, was I too old for Grenada? Yeah, I guess I was. I think the cutoff age is 35, and I think I was 35 when Grenada went down, and let's see. Yeah, that kind of puts me right, and I was like just a little too, the war was just about over. I didn't have to register for the Vietnam War, nor did I have to register for Ronald Reagan's compulsory military registration thing. So I kind of just missed the boat there both times. Of course, I would have fought in the Gulf War if I hadn't been 38 years old at the time, or whatever age I was. I don't know. Anyway, let's see. Okay, let's wrap this up. Any bimbos? Bimbos on the side. What do you mean by bimbos on the side? You mean did I ever fuck my babysitter? No. Do you mean did I ever kiss a stranger in a train station? Well, maybe. But what business is it of yours? Well, did anybody see you kiss this stranger in a train station? Oh, only about 500,000 people. It was Grand Central Station in New York. We were bored. We just shared a little smooch. It was nothing serious. I don't think anybody recognized me. I don't know. I was wearing false whiskers and a hat, and I was conspicuous by my inconspicuousness. I don't think there's anything. They got anything on me here, quite frankly. Well, all right. I think you passed. I think we could probably slide you through the radar screen. You've been very truthful and honest with us, and we appreciate it. And we are very much in your gratitude for being so open and forthright about your peccadillos, which in fact will come up in the course of the press's scrutiny of your record. But we need to know one more thing. Have you ever hired any illegal immigrants to serve as your nanny or housekeeper or hired help or gardener or of any kind? Well, I mean, I lived in California, for Christ's sake. Well, what do you want from me? Yeah, I did hire illegals, but I created a fake Social Security record for them and helped them get legalized status, and everything was perfectly above the board. And quite frankly, I resent these allegations. I say, see you later, allegations, and I refuse to answer any more questions of this kind. Well, you know, the hired help thing, I mean, they make a big deal of it, but it's no big deal at all. We'll just say that you made your decisions before you realized the consequences of blah, 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 and that later they did get legal Americanized status, and at that time you continued to employ them and pay them a working wage and pay their Social Security and so forth. I don't think that'll be a problem. Well, Mr. Clinton, I think that you could probably run for president, and I don't think anybody will bother you. Um, so, anyway, we are very glad we had this little interview with you, and we hope that you are, in fact, being truthful with us, because if we find out you lied, we're gonna be real mad, you know, real mad, and we're not gonna like it one bit if you lied to us. But you know, if you tell the truth, we're not gonna hit you. But if you lie to us, you're gonna get hit. Well, okay. Thank you very much. So anyway, how do I segue out of that 15-minute improvisation into this? Jack Kemp. You know, Jack Kemp, he was Dole's vice presidential candidate, and he was always trying to call the signals. Even though he was Dole's VP, and Dole didn't much care for him anyway. Nevertheless, he was always trying to call the signals. That's what they said about him. Who said that about him, you may ask? Gee, I don't know. James Carville? Was it? I think it was. But Dole was unable to discuss his objections to Halprin's speech. You know that big speech he gave that novelist Ghost wrote for him? In a way that produced a coherent result. Now here's what Dick Morris said. Gentlemen callers in a brothel do not talk to each other. Morris to two press representatives. Morris's great gift, said White House aide Bruce Reed, was to imagine things that others thought unthinkable. Dick Morris, he wrote this speech for Hillary Clinton on children's issues. One of the lines is, "Bloom, little ones, wherever you are planted." Harry Thomason, he was the guy behind torpedoing Dick. He said, "Dick's gone bad. Someone's going to have to put him down." It sounds an awful lot like the Wild West here. Mike McCurry, the president's spokesman, had once joked that his job entailed the art of telling the truth slowly. So anyway, more about Dick Morris and the president's advisors. As I said, I was going to devote the bulk of this discussion to all the president's men in this presentation entitled Negative Capability. Well, you might have noticed that in the Wall Street Journal there was a headline that said, "Top strategist losing his grip on campaign. All danger signs." And then finally the scandal breaks. Bill Clinton, "It's not tolerable," says Bill Clinton. And when Bill Clinton says that, you know that it really is not tolerable. What a way to say it, though, tolerable. Who the hell is he? Huck Finn? Well, I reckon it was a tolerable kind of day, but that kind of behavior just weren't tolerable. Putting snakes in Jim's bed, just weren't, putting that rattlesnake weren't tolerable. Well, then Jim had to take some of a nip of Pappy's moonshine, and that was just about near as bad as the snake bite. I reckon I'd rather have a snake bite than to drink any of Pabst's moonshine, that's for sure. This was the year that both parties made the final leap into Oprah land, where the convention was drained of conflict and content and transformed into talk TV. Bill Clinton read Dick Morris's farewell screed. It sounded like something O.J. Simpson might write. Vice President Gore joked that he hoped the other consultants would be available to get into trouble if the president ever fell behind. The Perot campaign was a slightly wacky sideshow, said Andrew Murray. Perot once described himself as an albino monkey who could draw crowds to the circus. Dick Lamb, who ran for the nomination of the so-called Reform Party, was a contrarian, a well-intentioned politician who seemed almost perversely determined to offend. Lamb told Perot that the contest between them wasn't credible. He proposed that they both drop out in favor of someone else. "Who are you fronting for?" Perot demanded. The two never spoke again. Lamb's charges and Perot's equivocations were a disaster for the Reform Party. And you can't spell reform without Perot, I've noticed. P-E-R-O-T, right? R-E and O. If you take Perot away from the Reform Party, it's just the Froom Party. So, Lamb's charges and Perot's equivocations were a disaster for the Reform Party. Instead of presenting a new, clean approach to politics, it made the race for the Reform Party nomination seem like papal politics in the 15th century. And of course, Perot gets that guy for vice presidential nomination in the Reform Party, some hand-picked dude that he wrote a book with about the Japanese, instead of brave but foggy Admiral James Stockdale. Perot imagined what it would be like if political consultants had run earlier campaigns. Washington would be out, those wooden teeth, and so would Lincoln, too ugly. Perot thought he had become more astute, but he also seemed more timid and more of a politician. Perot said, Winston Churchill would have to buy a toupee and lose 60 pounds and the cigar. More about the campaign. Why did Dole lose? Soccer moms hated negative campaigning. Dole was faced with a dilemma, how to attack without offending. Solving this riddle would have taken a very adroit candidate backed by a shrewd strategist. The Dole campaign had neither. Infighting and paranoia prevailed. Gaffes and glitches galore. Anyway, John Buckley, the communication director, spoke of the need to court the Beltway echo media. All of these quotations, by the way, I should remind you, come from a single source, the election post-mortem issue of Newsweek dated November 18th, 1996. When Dole was angry, his gaze was like a laser, but often aimed at the person just next to the person he was really angry at. And did you know, if Dole had been elected president, he would have been our first colorblind president? That's a minor footnote in the histories of the colorblind. James Ogilvy was the famous ad director and founder of Ogilvy and Mather, was colorblind. And there was a recent book called In the Island of the Colorblind, about this island of natives off in Melanesia or somewhere, who all were colorblind, but totally colorblind. And what this did was give them extraordinarily acute night vision, and since they were subsistence fishers, I suppose that was an advantageous thing for them to have developed as a quality, the ability to have acute night vision, but an inability to see very well at all in the daytime. In fact, not only were they colorblind, but that light sort of blinded them. In intense sunlight, they were incapable of shuttering their eyes. The eye is a wonderful mechanism, almost as wonderful as this miserable, stinking camera that I'm forced to use, overdubbing audio components over pre-existing video in order to continue to bring you these presentations at the hectic pace which I am forced to produce them, owing to the exigencies of television production. It's a disaster if you're not at least 6 weeks ahead in your schedule. Now, I'm just getting to the point where I'm a little more than a month ahead, and next week I hope to be 6 weeks ahead, and the week after that I hope to be 2 months ahead. 3 weeks from now I hope to be 2.5 months ahead, and a month from now, hopefully, I will be the utterly desirable 3 months ahead. The dog is sleeping and is twitching. Mona! Now I shouted her name and she stopped twitching. Why is that? What were you doing in your sleep? Why is she sleeping now? Lazy dog. It's 11:58 in the morning. What, you didn't sleep all night? Is this all you do is sleep, Mona? When I call her name, she stops twitching. It's so weird. What in the hell are you dreaming about? Chasing a rabbit? Running away from another dog? What? Hey, Mona, want to go for a walk in the park? Wow, she is dead asleep. Usually she would just jump up. Hey Mona, you want your supper? Mona, go for a walk in the park. Oh, now she jumps up. No, no, not yet. Later. Later. Go lay down. Lay down. She doesn't understand me. I guess the sound of my voice puts dogs asleep. There she goes. Now she's stretching and yawning. And, falling back asleep. I wouldn't mind staying in bed myself. Dole's dry humor masked his discomfort with the campaign's direction. He would have to go negative, he knew, not because he wanted to, but because there was no place else to go. Alex Castellanos is quoted as saying about Bill Clinton, first we call him a liberal, and when he says, no, I'm not, great. Now you're a lying liberal, and we call him a liberal and a liar. That's how you ease into the character issue. Dole seemed oddly passionless, as if he didn't really mean what he was saying. Voters could sense Dole's capacity for genuine rage. It lurked there, just beneath the surface. But he seemed to be going through the motions when he attacked Clinton. At times, he seemed to be winking to his audiences, signaling his sense of the absurdity of it all. At other times, he just seemed sullen and insincere. In fact, Dole's dilemma was his having to make a choice between taking the high road in the east or the low road in the west. Dole rarely lashed out when angry. Instead, he grew very, very quiet. Well, like that would be a help to him, right? President Dole, the Russians said that the Chinese are launching nuclear missiles towards California. President Dole? President Dole? Dole! And the Washington in crowd, which has always believed that Clinton is a rube and that it is their duty to bring him down. Isn't that what they believed about Carter as well? Oh, they probably believed that about Warren G. Harding. Is that a dead fly on the fan? Well, it's some sort of dust. Wouldn't that be a hellish thing to be sitting there eating dinner and this big piece of crap falls in your food? Well, whatever it was gone now. Damn, this fan. I can see when I dusted it last time. Well, I missed a couple of big pieces here. Well, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. Well then, let us go then, you and I. Like the constellations spread against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go then, you and I, and Betty Grable. Well, we're down to the last hour. We're down to the dozens, and this is why. Big-eyed beans from Venus. Don't let anything get in between us. Men, let your wallets flop open, and women open your purses, because a man or a woman without a big-eyed bean from Venus is suffering from the brain fever. I'm sorry, I'm quoting Captain Beefheart, but I'm not quoting him very well, alas. However, now here's an interesting anecdote that was told to me by a friend of mine. When Eleanor Roosevelt was giving one of these speeches at the Democratic National Campaign about Adlai Stevenson, and she would say, Adlai Stevenson is a great American. My late husband would have heartily endorsed Adlai Stevenson. And then somebody yells from the audience, Adlai Stevenson is a fag. Eleanor Roosevelt pauses and then says, "Nevertheless," I can't believe that this actually happened. But, you know, with these things, you never really know. So, anyway, how did Clinton win the 1996 election? Clinton's team relentlessly drove home the message that Dole was too old and too out of it to be president. Kemp had broken out in a Nixonian sweat under the glare of the lights, and at one point had even been buzzed by a fly. That is so wonderful. To the camera, during the second debate, it appeared that Clinton was peering benevolently over Dole's shoulder, winking at the audience with an "I'll straighten this out for you folks in a second, just as soon as he's done fussing" nonchalance. At one point, Clinton leaned jauntily against the podium with his ankles crossed, as though he were waiting for a cold one to come sliding down the bar. "If we lose this election, we're the stupidest people in American political history," said Ross Klein to Gore. As he wandered the country in the last days of the campaign, Dole threw away his prepared speeches and began riffing, offering up a strange pastiche of fractured metaphors, old lines from his primary speeches, and whatever else floated into his mind. He compared the White House to a laundromat and accused the president of cheating at golf. The diatribes struck some of the reporters on the press bus as oddly good-natured. Dole seemed to be having fun in a dark sort of way. But the outbursts just scared off more voters. The GOP strategy in the waning days of the campaign was, don't give Clinton a blank check. And as far as it went, it seemed to work because the Democrats did not win both houses of Congress. Of course, you know, even if they had won both houses of Congress, now Clinton has to face opposition from the left wing of the Democratic Party in Congress, and I'm sure that if the Democrats had won a majority, Clinton still couldn't really have done much of anything because of the opposition of the left wing of the Democratic Party. In other words, the Democratic Party would have been split, and Clinton would have had to have brokered a three-way compromise, which would have satisfied the Republican right-wingers, the Democratic and Republican moderates, and the left-wing Democrats. Of course, that's what statecraft is all about. But that doesn't mean it's fun. If ever there was a candidate not destined to win, it was Bob Dole. Bill Clinton, in the final analysis, had learned what JFK had discovered in his history books and Ronald Reagan had intuited from the movies. The presidents who succeed are those who master the part. Ford never managed it, neither did Jimmy Carter or George Bush. Bob Dole was always a black and white movie in a color age. Campaigns are struggles for power, and candidates most often seek it by finessing the hard questions until they are safely in office. Americans in normal times do not like to be governed by abstract principle. What Bill Clinton offered America, in effect, was the small deal, an ad hoc activism that sought to ameliorate problems rather than write and staff expensive programs to solve them. politics in America is situational. It is shaped more by personalities and events than by large ideas. So much for that. Well, it's interesting that our cousins across the Atlantic, in the London Spectator, had a great deal to say about the presidential election, even before it was actually a fact. For the Spectator came out on the 9th of November, which meant that it was printed on the 2nd of November, presumably, unless they don't follow the American practice of dating everything a week in advance. In any event, Bill Clinton, they called much the worst president ever to be reelected. This is Bruce Anderson in the Spectator of November 9th, 1996. Behind the celluloid smiles, there is a moral hollowing. A modern electorate is incapable of seeing past the celluloid. Hey, shoo! Celluloid? Was ist das? Now, what was I reading about celluloid? Jimi Hendrix referred to his guitar playing as musical celluloid, which is kind of odd. More specifically, Jimi Hendrix referred to his guitar playing. He said his music sometimes sounded like a cellophane typewriter. What the hell does that mean? I'm sorry, just had to get that in. I know it's free associating all over the place, and there's no place for it. And if if I weren't under these incredibly brutalizing time constraints, I could do a really sharp 15-minute presentation every week instead of a really loose and flaccid 2-hour presentation. But anyway, according to the London Spectator, particularly Bruce Anderson, most of the women whose votes kept Bill Clinton in the White House would not want him as a husband, while a sizable majority of Americans would be unhappy if their children grew up like him. Bob Dole was Boris Karloff without the humor, or the Undertaker on a busy day, a Captain Hook uncomfortable in his own skin. Bill Clinton was an amoeba, turning into anything he wanted to, fuzzy-headed, big-nosed, often grinning inanely but effectively, oozing gargantuan self-confidence, the trapeze artist swinging on the issues. Ross Perot started in the cartoons with bats flying from his ears and ended flying out of bats' ears. This is William Vesty. Very funny. Clinton versus Dole is like herpes versus hemorrhoids, said Kim Levine. The White House takes its name not from its color, but from the color of the happy dust ingested by the staff, says Taki. The Clinton doctrine, even when caught red-handed, never admit wrongdoing, but accuse the accuser. Lothario denies to his wife the fact that a woman is lying naked next to him and tells her, "Who are you going to believe? The man who loves you or your lying eyes?" If there's one thing that drives people bonkers as much as fame does, then it's writing novels. It makes them very important and serious. Just thought I'd throw that in. So, of all people who can sympathize with politicians. I think perhaps novelists and messiahs are capable, best capable, of so doing. The Clinton administration looks you in the eye and says, we're going to give you targeted tax cuts if you keep your room clean and eat your vegetables and do all the other things the government wants you to do, and if you eat your vegetables, you could live as long as Senator Thurman, who was going to be reelected without any problems. I used to follow him around. When he ate a banana, I ate a banana. Whatever works. Bob Dole. Any findings will immediately be attacked as part of an ever-widening cover-up, says Charles Lane about the, quote, pointless CIA crack investigations, tearing down the legitimacy of government institutions in order to build up their own short-term political prospects. The would-be white hats in this presidential race were the senior senator from the state of ethanol and Ross Perot, whose only Reform Party primary resembled a city council race in Palermo. It's roll tide roll in Alabama for the Dole people. Some thought this was the dirtiest, smelliest campaign ever, that the stench was strong enough to choke a buzzard. Now, after we've given you Mr. Map, we're going live to Little Rock. If the Republicans hold on to the Senate, PC will have to do mucho business with Pete Dominici. We may see MJ's baby before we see the final outcome for the House. Now, the question is, are the Dems going to dance the mandate Macarena? This race is hot and tight as a too-tight bathing suit on a too-hot car ride back to the beach. We'll be back to continue CBS's coverage of Election Night 1996. November 2nd. The events themselves quickly became a blur of weird theme songs, play that funky music, white boy, odd slogans suspended over the back of the stage behind Dole, honest energy, and strange rhetoric from the podium. Dole in Indianapolis pointing to a race car. That's what we're doing. 500, 96 hours, non-stop, 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 said Michael Lewis. From the beginning, the Dole people have preferred to insult your intelligence rather than to craft more plausible lies. When it comes to your leaders, according to the Weekly Standard, Bart Alocella reporting, when it comes to our leaders, having character apparently isn't as important as being one. I was born in a summer storm to a widowed mother in a small town. There is no person in America tonight who feels more humble in the face of victory than I do. And I believe in my heart that every child deserves the main chance that I was given. Bill Clinton, a consummate campaigner with an uncanny ability to extricate himself from one self-inflicted disaster after another. Bob Dole. He became a commentator on his own campaign, an ironic critic, says Charles Krauthammer. Dole spent as much of the campaign musing about whether he ought to make certain issues into issues. The predictable result was to undermine whatever stance he finally took. Keep your eye on the main chance and Don't stop to kick every barking dog, says Morton Blackwell. Mike Salinas, in the Advocate of November 12th, perhaps subconsciously echoing the folks in the Spectator. Now, as you recall, I quoted the people in the Spectator, specifically Kim Levine, as saying, Clinton versus Dole is like herpes versus hemorrhoids. In the Advocate, someone named Mike Salinas called the presidential race between Bill Clinton and Bob Dole the choice between eating shit and eating popcorn. Well, quite a tactful and diplomatic way of putting it, I suppose. Coke snorting, wife swapping, baby born out of wedlock, radical Hollywood left. This is Bob Dornan on Barbara Boxer's campaign contributors, cited by Andrew Murr. That Bob Dornan, he's a passion. Bob Dole on Bill Clinton. Womanizer, adulterer, a disgraced draft dodger who demeans the Oval Office with his silk girly jogging pants, showing those beautiful white doughboy thighs of his. Oh no, I'm sorry, that wasn't Bob Dole. That was Bob Dornan. Womanizer, adulterer, a disgraced draft dodger with his silk girly jogging pants, showing those beautiful white doughboy thighs of his. Bob Dornan, cited by Andrew Murr. Every time I see Dornan, he looks like he needs a rabies shot. Bill Clinton on Bob Dornan. Bill Clinton. He feels the pain of everyone except those who happen to work for him, said John Alter on Harold Ikes' firing after the election. Richard M. Nixon was called the resentful striver from the West. And Bob Dole had a lot of that qualification as well for presidency, that he was the resentful striver from the Midwest. The oil industry, and Texaco in particular, has long had a reputation for arrogance. Refining and drilling for oil doesn't require much consumer research. It's an insulated industry. And as long as we're sort of getting off the program here, the most cosmopolitan, obscenely irresponsible people the world has ever known, Ken Marshall on the Titanic passengers. By the way, there's a new hot rod, a production car based on the hot rod configuration. It's called the Plymouth Prowler. When we were in high school, it was an all-male boarding school run by Benedictine monks. And, of course, there was religious instruction, and we used to ask the monks, is it a sin to get drunk? And they said it was. They said, quoting from Samuel Johnson, "He who makes a beast of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man." And that reminds me of Hunter S. Thompson, who in 1972 referred to Hubert Humphrey as a gutless old ward healer who should be stuffed in a bottle and shipped out onto the Pacific. Of course, in 1996, he has refined his campaign rhetoric somewhat and refers to Bill Clinton as a gutless compromiser. Well, Doug Whitmer, who some might interpret as being one of the unelected masters of the obvious, in Time magazine said, both candidates were helplessly chained to the politics of big money. For that matter, recent revelations show both political parties were also chained to the politics of big money. Well, and you can hardly blame them too, could you? One time I was watching television at the home of my friend Brian, whose doctor father happened to be around, as well as his older brother. And at the time, I didn't watch much television, so I was startled by just how mercenary everything was. And I said, everything on television is about money. And his older brother Chris turned to me and said, that's because everything is about money. Yes, it's all about money, folks. Forget doing anything with your lives except accumulating money. Money is the be-all and end-all of our existence. Money is this day the power in this land. 1840. The man who hates money hates life. Money is like a sixth sense. Without it, you can't fully enjoy the other five. Love of money is the root of all evil. It is easier, I say unto you, it will be easier for a rich man to pass through a needle's eye than to get into the kingdom of heaven. Of course, the learned Dick Gregory informs us that there was, in fact, a passageway called the Needle's Eye in Jerusalem, through which a man with a heavily loaded camel could not pass. However, if he divested the camel of some of his possessions, he could pass through the needle. And in that way, the rich man could pass through the needle's eye and could, in fact, enter the kingdom of heaven if he got rid of some of his excess baggage. Well, Bob Dornan. Bob Dornan referred to Bill Clinton as a nerdy little flower child. He also referred to feminists as lesbian spear chuckers, which is really offensive on several levels, not just the simple one of slurring people who happen to have different beliefs from him. Spear chucker is also a derogatory term for African Americans, so it looks like Bob Dornan is out to offend just about as many people as he possibly can. So when Bill Clinton says that he always looks like he needs a rabies shot, I suppose he's not really exaggerating that much. And Bob Dornan, of course, lost his congressional race in a squeaker to a female Hispanic candidate because of the changing demographics of Orange County, and perhaps because Bob Dornan is an embarrassment even to crazed right-wing conservatives because of his loose cannon nature. Of course, the idea that Bob Dornan would run for president also probably irritated some people. I mean, if you're not going to win, running for president is kind of like an exercise in insanity. How many Microsoft vice presidents does it take to change a light bulb. 8. 1 to work the bulb, and 7 to make sure Microsoft gets $2 for every light bulb ever changed anywhere in the world. How many Microsoft engineers does it take to change a light bulb? None. Bill Gates will just redefine darkness, trademark, as an industry standard. Well, before too long, our present day video cameras will be obsolete. Isn't it comforting for me to know that every videotape I have ever made in the VHS format will be unshowable on television by the year 2006? So let's see, I've been making these tapes since 1991. 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 7 years, 8 years, 98, and 8. Yeah, so I got to stop doing this in 1998 and show reruns, and then start making new stuff back in the year 2006. That should be fun. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff here about Hustler magazine. Only jokes that have a purpose run the risk of meeting with people who do not want to listen to them. Cool. That's exactly right. And Freud said it. So you know I'm not just putting you on, Daddy-O. I'll repeat it. Only jokes that have a purpose run the risk of meeting with people who do not want to listen to them. The Clinton treatment, says Jane Meyer. People are just disappeared. It's hard for them to go from wooing people to screwing people. They're the sort of person who seeks an approval. That's why they want to be president. Well, one tradition has it that the Caliph who burned the Alexandria Library did so because he felt that all previous writing was either misleading or superfluous once the Holy Koran had become available as the only dependable source of all true knowledge and wisdom. A similar belief in the sufficiency of the Holy Electronic seems to lie behind the trashing of printed matter in the San Francisco Public Library, according to Frank G. Nelson in an article in the New Yorker, which had the library world all a-Twitter. Can you really have a marketplace of ideas when the number of shops seems to be steadily shrinking and the remaining merchants are growing ever more powerful? See, now, I'm getting off message here again. I suppose what I really want to say at this point is that once Clinton was reelected, the long knives of the press once again were brandished. Now, the press certainly did not want to see Bob Dole become president. So, although they reported upon the various things that the Clinton administration had done which might possibly render him a less than satisfactory president, they did not really create that big a deal about them prior to the election. And when that Bob Dole adultery scandal broke 2 weeks before the election, I think the reason the press didn't really run with it, it wasn't so much that they felt that it wasn't that important, which in fact it wasn't. I think it was because they didn't want to overemphasize it lest Bob Dole lose so many votes that it no longer be an interesting race. I mean, I suppose there was one chance in about, I don't know, 1 chance in 10 that Bob Dole could actually have won. But had that scandal broken, the odds might have plunged to 1 chance in 25, and nobody really wants to watch a race like that. You know, politics is like horse races, but I think politics are a lot more predictable. Horse races are based upon variables that, to a certain degree, can't be predicted by statistics. Sure, you can look at the horse's prior track record, but you can't survey a bunch of racetrack honchos and get with any reliable sort of results the actual results of the race. Whereas you can survey a great number of people who will say whether or not they're willing to vote for the candidate in question and get reasonably reliable results. You know, I've really got to stop drinking so much damn coffee. I drank an entire pot of coffee yesterday when I was doing last week's presentation, and I felt lousy all day, so bad that I couldn't even drink any more coffee. I guess it was a case of me being, once again, too much coffee, man. Dr. Decaf and Mr. Caffeine. So, anyway, yes. So, I had a delicious mango for breakfast. Also, 3 eggs and about 4 ounces of beans with cheese melted over them. Now, was that a healthful breakfast? I don't know. Once again, it sounds to me like cholesterol city. Well, quoting from The Economist, that prestigious journal of political and economic commentary published in the United Kingdom, from the November 16th issue, which I believe would have been the first one in which they could have spoken of the presidential race in a full-fledged way once it had become de facto. A mediocre incumbent, says S.T. Chang, of possibly doubtful character, and an incoherent, somewhat sometimes inconsistent, sometimes incoherent challenger about the race. Omar Bradley says, amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. A John F. Kennedy aide said, everybody believes in democracy until he gets to the White House, and then you believe in dictatorship because it's so hard to get things done. I believe in dictatorship. Well, to quote from Marcy Carney, too much praise only creates enemies for you. Something to keep in mind. The feminist versus homemaker polemic is not salient for most people's lives. In my experience, people are pragmatic rather than ideological about their decisions. So for all of Bob Dole's talk about lesbian spear chuckers, it's just not a happening type of rhetoric in this land. Well, you know who Bill Clinton really is? He's the Democratic version of William Bennett. Scratchers. Fans who like to dig their fingernails into the president's hands to claw off skin as a souvenir. Can you dig it? Punk has become formula now. It's basically Cheap Trick with louder guitars, says Mike Ness of Social Distortion, quoted by Steve Morse in the Boston Globe of November 22nd. Interesting, right? Not much to do with negative capability, but interesting. Bill Clinton in the New Republic of December 2nd. Michael Kelly says, "He is, of course, a shocking liar. He will say absolutely anything at all. He is breathtakingly cynical, an opportunist of such proportions that the only thing that exceeds his reach is his grasp, an occasional demagogue, blithely willing to exploit the rawest fears and the most dangerous divisions in society, the fairest of fair-weather friends, perhaps the greatest golf cheat in the history of the game." He goes on to say, "Voters approve the Congress that is conservative and a president that apes the popular aspects of conservatism and denounces the less popular. The choice for liberalism is between Clinton and the howling void, not between Clintonism and something more pure, wholesome, and good. The left liberalism that considers itself the true faith and now calls itself progressivism once again proved in 1996 its irrelevance. It is an ideology of self-styled saints, a philosophy of determined perversity. Its animating impulse is to marginalize itself and then to enjoy its own company, and to make itself as unattractive as to as many as possible. If it were a person, it would pierce its tongue, and this perversity reached a state of perfection in 1996. Again, quoting from Michael Kelly, Bill Clinton despised nearly as completely in the pages of The Nation as in those of the American Spectator. The progressives rallied behind Ralph Nader. Nader is the nadir. He represents the end of left liberalism, the personification of holy self-marginalization. He wouldn't join any campaign that would have him as its candidate. He is the only person to ever run for president on the platform that running for president was beneath him. It turned out not to be a very good strategy. Bill Clinton is not a leader constrained by the old pieties of honesty, commitment, and courage of commitment. Such a leader simply wouldn't have had the stomach for the job. A more squeamish politician would have nauseated himself. Victory always has its price. For the delicate, in 1996, it's nausea. About as devastating a commentary on the 1996 presidential election as one could perhaps wish for, if in fact one were busily engaged in wishing for such a thing. Well, we're coming close to the end of our spoken word presentation, except of course for the strangely late Forbes Media Critic, which came out well after the election, dated fall of 1996. I think that's the last issue to have come out, even now, 7 months later, in which they are still talking about Dick Lamb, referring to him, at least Maureen Dowd, in Maureen Dowd's words, as Governor Gloom. In this year's fiscal rectitude, eat your peas, take your medicine, hard choices, big parties are corrupt tools of special interest, and only I can tell the truth, unconventional, unpackaged, grassroots, centrist. Also, on General Powell, when the general needed to sell a hardback, he toyed with the notion of president. When he needed to sell a paperback, he toyed with the idea of vice president. On Bob Dole, your heart goes out to a retired veteran who's foolhardy enough to run for president without a single thing to say and the inability to say it. Again, quoting from Maureen Dowd. Bill Clinton to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Honey, we shrunk the presidency. Instead of the Great Society, Mr. Clinton now brings us the Itsy Bitsy Society. Instead of a rendezvous with destiny, he has an appointment with the detail, the aura of principle, if not principle. Mr. Dole cannot bring himself to give the public what it wants, an articulate, coherent plan outlining where he wants to take the country. Clinton's tobacco crusade stopped abruptly at America's shores, says Anthony Flint in the Boston Globe of June 9th, 1996. Eleanor Randolph is quoted from the LA Times as having said, "Yelling about the media is like bellowing at the empire. Maybe it can't change the calls reporters and editors made about yesterday's story, but it might make a difference in tomorrow's." Russell Baker, New York Times, August 6, 1996. It takes great self-confidence to write a newspaper column. Some might say it takes arrogance. Be that as it may, my willingness to pronounce on a great many matters of which I have little or no knowledge is one of the prime qualifications of my trade. Philip Knightley. All journalism involves some degree of risk because it is basically an anarchical activity that thrives on exposure, disrespect, and creating mischief. Say, how do I get on this? And to quote from Michael Kelly in the New Yorker of July 15th, 1996, reporters love familiarity. Struggling on deadline to make sense of the chaos that is the daily world, they operate on a sense of conventions by fitting the confusing and often conflicting facts before them into certain well-established paradigms. Journalists, says Leon Wieseltier in the New Republic of August 12, 1996, journalists are among the many professionals in this derangingly complex society who are licensed for secrets. And a secret is not a lie. Martin Sproul. Dr. John Hagelin, the natural law candidate, of whom we have yet to mention except for the first time in part 6 of our presentation here. So we went through a good 10 hours of this without once mentioning the natural law candidate. Pretty good as far as restraint goes. Dr. John Hagelin, says Martin Sproul, spoke frankly of the poisoning of our country by pesticides, destructive agricultural practices, genetically engineered foods, nuclear waste, and the side effects of allopathic pharmaceuticals, said The Nation in their November 25th, 1996 issue. The Republicans of 1994 just said no to government. Clinton responded, okay, no more big government. With an unrepentant speaker still in charge and a born-again minimalist president re-elected, consensus is the true victor of the 1996 elections. That pretty much slams the lid on those elections. Of course, the nation had quite a bit to say about the elections. And now we get to the post-mortem of the 1996 elections as commented upon in The Nation from November 25th and December 2nd of 1996. Dole bet the farm on the trust card and discovered that people preferred the scoundrel they knew, especially one who was energetic, articulate, personable, empathetic, and a foil to Newt Gingrich. All of these are cited from the editorial of The Nation in the first post-mortem issue of the 1996 campaigns. Bill Clinton, they refer to his pint-sized proposals, go on to say, Clinton sought affirmation for a status quo that accepts corporate power and diluted republicanism, pushes a few but modest liberal offerings, and opposes the excesses of the far right. That's not a course that will generate much political energy. Liberalism hasn't disappeared, just populism. Bill Clinton did benefit from a discouraging trend, the downsizing of political expectations. Many no longer look to the president or the system itself to address the problems of the day. The truth is, most Americans do not care about politics, and that is a victory for conservatives. This election was an uneasy truce between a big talk, small action president who plagiarized from the GOP and a conservative Republican force compelled to smother its zealotry. They actually agree on reducing Medicare and Medicaid, letting economic globalization run its course, banking big money contributions, dismissing big government, scapegoating the poor, and worshiping a balanced budget. The campaign of 1996 further codifies this suffocating consensus. We are pleased to announce the re-election of Texas State Senator Drew Nixon of Carthage. Nixon is the fellow who was found by Dallas police in a car with not one but 3 prostitutes. He explained he thought they were asking for directions, which is funny because Eddie Murphy was caught at 4:45 a.m. With a transvestite prostitute in his car just recently, and explained that he thought she needed a ride and he gave it to her because he was concerned for her safety. Molly Ivins goes on to talk about how Texans don't much like foreigners. As our former Governor Bill Clement said during an etiquette lesson preceding the visit of Deng Xiaoping of China to Houston, now we have to be nice to this little feller, and remember, we all like chop suey. Democrats lost, says Alexander Cockburn. Bill Clinton threw them overboard. The country voted a straight Republican ticket. Pretty good point. If you've been following The Nation lately, you may have noticed how Cockburn has been whining about how they're cutting him back from 1 page to 2. Hello? Hi, how you doing? Oh, not too bad. No calls. No nothing. Yep. Not blinking. Nope. Not a chance. You're not going to be able to wiggle out of that one. Yeah, I'm sure they're on. If not, I'll try to locate them. Alright. Okay. Sounds good. Alright then. Bye-bye. So she wants to, she has to go and talk to the neighbors about her elderly neighbor who is incapable of taking care of herself. Just part of the compassionate legislation that pertains to the elderly in this country. So, donuts. Are there any coupons for donuts here? Well, we have a whole bunch of Dunkin' Donuts coupons, and As a matter of fact, here is one. That's good. Well, we only have 6 minutes left. It's going to be tough for me to skate through all this material in the short time that remains. However, I will endeavor to do my bloody well best. So, anyway, having Huang won, says Cockburn, Clinton carried the all-important Indonesian electoral college vote. David L. Kerp, cited by James Richardson, says, in his first years in Sacramento, Willie Brown proposed that lobbyists, like racehorses, be required to wear day-glow costumes emblazoned with assigned numbers. And goes on to talk about the California Speaker of the House as being the closest thing in the world to the Ayatollah. However, we're trying to focus on the presidential campaign. And in the nation of November 2nd, there is a eulogy for Mario Savio, which I think would be interesting to begin to wind down on. Cerebral to a fault, he stammered awkwardly in private conversation and expressed thoughts so complex they were often hard to follow. But in moments of confrontation with authority, he was possessed of the perfect articulation of outraged innocence. He stepped off the stage of history and led a low-profile life, shunning all interviews. The man the media appointed a leader did not believe in leaders. Today, meaning is the prime commodity, and attention the scarce resource, says Thomas D. Zengotia. And in politics, of course, that is more than ever the case. Why do voters stay home? It is demeaning for insider spectators to participate as if they were taken in, to act the part of the ordinary person that celebrity politicians address so unctuously from spotlit perches. Much better to be in a focus group. At least then you have an impact. People are just dying for the opportunity to have an impact. That is certainly the case. But unfortunately, our politics are a politics of negative capability, which is, of course, the title of this evening's presentation. Today's issues are iconic, severed from serious thought about the human condition, not grounded. All this according to Michael Moore, I suppose. Gee, I don't know who said this. Must be Michael Moore. Who else would say such a thing? No one really has any idea what's going on anymore, let alone what to do about it. Celebrated authorities serve only one imperative. The play's the thing, and they are the players. Journalism, says Janet Malcolm, is a confidence game in which the reporter holds a stacked deck. Well, you know something, I really am very much obliged to you for sticking it out, making it through this presentation with me. And so to conclude, Bill Clinton, Captain Comeback, says the New Statesman and Society for the 8th of November. In 1994, the Republicans ran a national campaign around national issues. This time, they tried to denationalize the campaign whenever they could. Teddy Roosevelt eased the country's transition into the industrial age, exactly what Clinton says he wants to do for the global high-tech era, says E.J. Dionne, who has recently written a book about the #1 issue of our day, the globalization of the economy. Well, that's all for today. Join us next week for part 7 of our presentation entitled Hopelessly Corrupt.